All right, 12 days away from the dotted line being signed for schools across the nation trying to compete for conference championships. That includes the Boston College Eagles, and it's always a fun discussion with Dan Rubin from BCInterruption. Dan, what are you up to today?
Hey, it's the first time I've seen daylight in about 3 days from my real job, so I'm just glad that I got the sun shining, the cold weather. It's almost springtime. It feels great.
It's almost springtime, man. That's a new one on me, but it sounds like you're working my kind of schedule. My
There's
goodness, let's look at this BC outfit and what we can hope for in the next 12 days. And maybe first, those guys that we really need to pay attention to because they could make an immediate impact. And you're also thinking, hey, their commits are pretty fully entrenched at this point.
Yeah, BC's got the right guys coming in this year, and they've done a really good job in terms of recruiting, in terms of getting the right guys in too with this class. When you're waiting for the letters of intent to come through, there's always a couple of names that you look at and you're always really excited, and then there's a couple of names that you look at and you have no idea who those guys are. And if there's nothing better for especially BC fans, it's that recruiting means hope springs eternal. Especially after the season that they had, and especially on the offense this year.
So who are some of those guys that you're really eyeing coming down to the wire here, where maybe they're talking about 3 or 4 schools, you don't have a real good feel, they're being a bit secretive, and it would really make it a much better class if you were able to reel those guys in?
There's a few recruits that I know BC is looking at, and in terms of because they lost a couple of guys, so when they're looking at least some knowledge or at least some ideas, they're looking a lot at the skill position type guys. The couple names that are jumping off the table at me that I actually can't remember off the top of my head. I know that they have a bunch of guys that they've been looking at in terms of it. Interest factor, a couple of 3-star guys, a couple of 4-star guys that they've been looking at, and a couple of names that I for whatever reason they just extremely escape me right now. But I know that it's at the skill positions, and I know that it's at mostly guys that are wide receiver, defensive back. That position is just, the names are totally blanking right now.
Dan, I'm going to bail you out just a little bit here. So we're going to move on to positional need, and I'm pretty much just an expert on Boston College football because I'm going to make this deduction. You need offense. Defense, sure, you need some more defense, obviously, with guys moving on, but you're going to need to focus on the offensive side of the football. Is this recruiting class going to get some of that headway made?
Oh yeah, they took a beating in the recruiting side for a while leading up to Steve Addazio's era in terms of position players, and so the cupboard is extremely bare. They had a number of guys who came in last year who were going to be impact players at the wide receiver position. They did not have any wide receivers in stock, so they went out. They had a big class there. After the offense performed as poorly as it did this year, they went out and they continued to recruit some of those positions, especially in the offensive line. They have a couple of offensive linemen coming in. Eddy Fish out of Groton, Massachusetts is one. Local guys too. Shane Leonard is another one. Shawn Ragan. Those are all local offensive linemen who are 2 or 3-star recruits, which is where BC normally camps out. They do go after the 4-star recruits, and they are in the running for some 4-star recruits. But for the most part, BC is going to get a lot of coachable 2-star and 3-star recruits who do a couple of things really well, and then they build them up from there. That's always been the MO. In terms of the other skill positions, they needed a lot of help at the tight end position. They got one in Tommy Murphy last year, or Tommy Sweeney, I'm sorry, Tommy Sweeney last year. They have another one coming in from down in Connecticut, Scooter Harrington. He's recruited. He's going to be in next fall, tight end out of Greenwich, Connecticut. So they're addressing some of the needs. But with this year, they did not get a lot of running back support. I don't think they expected to lose 3 running backs to start the preseason or to start the offseason. I mean, at the end of the year, they lost Marcus Outlaw, they lost Jordan Gowans. I don't think they were expecting to lose all of those guys at once. And when you lose that, plus Sherman Alston, it creates another void that's not going to be addressed by this recruiting class.
Dan, I think if you're ever searching for a name talking BC football, you throw Murphy out there. And you're right half the time, aren't you?
It's Murphy or it's Sweeney, and I knew it was Sweeney. I don't know where I came from on Murphy. I think I had Tyler Murphy back on my brain.
What's the footprint of Addazio's search? Are we still talking the best players in New England and then trying to get to New Jersey and Florida?
Yeah, those are definitely his type of players. He's still in build the fence mode. He still definitely wants to get the best players from Massachusetts, the best players from Connecticut. You're not getting as much out of Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, or Maine. There's just not enough athletes. Occasionally, you get one coachable recruit out of Rhode Island, but high school sports up in New Hampshire, up in Maine, up in Vermont, they're just not going to draw well in terms of football. So you're still looking at Massachusetts. You're looking at the private schools in Massachusetts, the Lawrence Academies, the St. John's Preps, the St. John Shrewsburys. Those are all high schools that are really big in Massachusetts. They're the top ranked high schools, so you really camp out recruiting there. And then you go down into Connecticut. You get a couple of prep schools. I know John Fadul played prep school in Connecticut before coming to Boston College. He wound up as the starting quarterback last year as a walk-on. I mean, you could say what you want. The kid still wound up as a Division I starting quarterback. By the end of the year, he beat out 3 scholarship athletes, one of which was hurt, but he beat out at least 2 scholarship quarterbacks. So there's something to be said for recruiting down into the private schools. At the same time, he's been going down into New Jersey. They did lose a couple of New Jersey recruits. KJ Gray was one coming out of St. Xavier Prep. He did not stay with Boston College after Don Brown left for Michigan. He's now, I believe, looking at UMass and Rutgers. So that would actually be a big hit if he chooses UMass, because he would be leaving Boston College as a commitment and going to UMass. That said, they've actually started recruiting Texas a little bit. They get a couple of 3-star guys. Christian McStravick is a 3-star recruit, a 6'4" wide receiver out of Houston. They're still staying down in Florida, but at the same time, they're trying to find more guys from the Mid-Atlantic and start to really get down in Texas. Another Texas recruit that I know they recruited another kicker who's a 2-star kicker. I mean, 2 stars, you can say what you will, but he's a kicker. And we've had problems in that department lately. So you're able to come up with guys from different areas of big states and then get into the Mid-Atlantic, the Pennsylvanias, and stay in New Jersey and get down into the Marylands of the world as well.
You mentioned the term athlete a couple times during that spiel, and you do run into Clemson and Florida State a couple times a year. So having athletes on the field is a good thing. And I know we've talked about it in the past, and I'll just mention it again. I just think the uphill climb is tremendous, and that Addazio and former coaches as well, with the recruiting base being what it is and the academic challenges, I think it's pretty successful to be staying within a score or two of those 2 teams in particular, and winning some of those games from time to time. So
yeah, it's tough. I mean, when you're trying to recruit, you know that your areas, when you're from Boston College and you're trying to go out and get athletes, if you try to go outside of well, first of all, your home area where you're the biggest draw is not a fertile recruiting area. New England is not known as the high school mecca of high school football. It's just not on par. Your top athletes in Massachusetts maybe are Division I athletes, but then if they really are that good, you're getting tight ends that are going and being recruited by Penn State or being recruited by there was a kid from Dartmouth High School a couple of years ago, Arthur, I can't remember his last name. He wound up in Georgia. This year, Danny Dalton was supposed to come to Boston College. He's out of Mansfield High School in Massachusetts. He decommits and winds up committing to, I believe, Penn State. Or I know that he was looked at from Alabama as well. So the minute you start to get some of those other names on your junior commits, you lose them. So you're still able to stay in the top 10 in New England, but your top 2 or 3 who are really elite, they're going elsewhere. At the same time, then you really have to go into the other areas where once you get into Pennsylvania, once you get into Ohio, you're not out recruiting Ohio State or Penn State or Michigan or anyone else for that matter out of the Big Ten. So you start to look at the 2- and 3-star guys and say, how can we get these guys and then coach them up? They have a kid, Ethan Tucky, who was a 4-star recruit, and then he committed to Boston College and got mysteriously downgraded to 3 stars. So maybe the fact that he did commit to BC probably hurt him a little bit. He's out of Delaware, Ohio. He's a gray shirt. He's on campus already. He's going to take part in spring practice. Ethan Tucky was a big get because it was a 4-star recruit out of Ohio. You go in, and he's picking BC over other schools. But at the same time, when you're going into there, you're not getting your pick of the litter. You're getting guys who have one notable flaw, and you're trying to build a team around some of these guys and find guys who complement one another, as opposed to just going out and getting the best there is out there and then bringing them in and saying, well, here we go, another top 5 recruiting class. That's never going to happen at Boston College.
It's an intriguing process there at BC in particular, and Boston College usually pulls it off in terms of staying competitive with the likes of the teams that we mentioned, aside from the blip last year. Dan Rubin from BCInterruption joining us to provide the traditional insight and information at this recruiting class. Dan, it's always a pleasure.
Hey, it's football's a year-round commitment. I love it.